Good morning. Welcome to this session of the Forum on Government After Shock. Today's forum comes after a series of 65 regional and thematic events on rethinking and rebuilding through innovation. These events around the globe in 5 continents yesterday, they attracted more than 4,500 participants. And today, this Government After Shock event provides an opportunity for stock taking and reflecting on what worked, what didn't, and what might be missing. Now I give a special welcome to Minister Nikolai Astrup, Minister of Local Development and Modernization of Norway, for joining this leadership interview today. Thank you so much, Minister Astrup, for joining this leadership interview in order to share your experiences and insights on the implications of the COVID-19 crisis for government, and particularly sharing your views on the future of government going beyond the crisis. This interview will focus on the challenges you have been facing and also the solutions, what work well in managing a global problem, both at the national, and you are also in charge of the subnational, the local level. To begin with, I'd like to offer a poll to our audience in order to consider during this interview. We will come back with the results, but please put the questions on the screen, and you could see the 4 options for the following question. What kind of roles have national federal governments most effectively played in response to the crisis? So what role have national and federal governments most effectively played in response to the crisis? And you could see the 4 options to answer this question. First, deploying a unified response. Second, enabling other actors, including the subnational level. They can play a significant role. The third, countering negative economic impact. And fourth, providing direct support to citizens. So please submit your responses, and we will come back at the end of this interview with the results. I also encourage everyone to take part in the chat. Please share your questions, your views, your experiences at the column on the platform. You can also use the tweet, and you could tweet about this event at the #GovAfterShock. Now I would like to turn to Minister Astrup and ask you to briefly introduce yourself and also start sharing your insights about how you feel and how you managed inside the emergency in Norway.
Well, thank you so much, Janos, and thank you for inviting me to this event. I think in the aftermath of COVID-19, we're not there yet. There will be even more discussions on how we met the crisis and what new measures we need to put in place to face the next crisis in even better prepared than we were this time. Now, I think when we are struck with a global pandemic, every country, of course, needs to do what they can to react to that. But even most importantly, maybe, is to bring people on board, build trust. And I think we have succeeded quite well with that in Norway. We are a society with high trust already. And that has been important for our response measures and the willingness of the public to listen to government advice and restrictions regarding COVID-19. And in order to build that trust, I think communication is key. So during this crisis, we've had press conferences from the central government several times a week when that has been necessary. We also had done something new, I think, which we've had a press conference directed at kids. We've done that several times. And the Prime Minister and several other ministers have answered questions from kids, digitally, of course. And I think it's important to reach out to every part of the population, not only adults, but also the young ones, and build understanding around the measures that we need to adhere to and what we need to do together to beat this virus. We've also had people's question time on different platforms. So, for instance, on Facebook, where the Prime Minister and other ministers have answered questions from the public, and it's been a huge success. I think that has been part of building that trust I think also transparency is key. So being transparent about why you're implementing these measures, being transparent about both what we are secure about when it comes to the measures, but also the issues where we are not that sure that it might work, but we're still doing it. I think we need to be open about these things. I also think, well, it's been a challenge, and we've seen that in the COVID-19 cases, that a lot of our immigrant communities have not gotten all the information that they need. So we've lately worked differently on reaching out to those parts of our communities who do not necessarily follow the Norwegian news in the same way as the rest of the public does. And we've kept in close contacts with different religious communities, for instance, to make sure that their leaders convey to their church communities and other religious communities the necessity of following the guidelines and requirements that we all have to follow at this time. I also think coordination is key in a national response. So this morning I've just had a meeting with our county governors from across our country, and we're a long and diverse country, a big country. We don't have that many people, but circumstances are very different across the country. So it's important to keep in close touch with all the county governors, with municipalities. And in this meeting, we had no less than 5 ministers from the national government present in order to make sure that we are well coordinated across the different sectors that are affected by the COVID-19 crisis. The topic of this morning's meeting was vulnerable children and how we safeguard them in the circumstances. And I think that's a particularly important issue to make sure that those who are struggling before the crisis don't come out on the other end struggling even more. Now, in some areas that's inevitable, but I still think it's very important that we keep our focus on that and make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind in these dire times. And of course, in Norway, many of the responsibilities for handling the crisis and delivering the services to people is something that's done by the municipalities. So we have a unified approach in terms of having national guidelines, national requirements, national advice to the population and to municipalities. But it's also important that the local governments have the authority and the means available to adapt COVID-19 measures to the situation locally. And of course, that differs a lot. Now, for instance, now we're having a major outbreak in Oslo. But we're also having major outbreaks in smaller communities around the country. And then we have other municipalities where there has been no COVID-19 cases so far. So that just goes to show that the situation is very different locally, and we need to adapt the measures to the circumstances to make sure that people trust those restrictions that are put in place. Because if we put in place too harsh restrictions compared to the local situation, then people will lose that trust. And if similarly, if we don't do enough in those places where it's necessary to do more, then people will lose trust in us as a government and as both at the national and at the local level. I also think that we've kept the health authorities very much, we're in close contact with them, and all the press conferences that we do, we have together with the health professionals. And I think that also brings more trust to the decisions that we come to, because they are based on scientific advice, and we are open about the circumstances when we disregard that advice, because in some instances there are other things that needs to be taken into consideration than just health. Of course, we know that the COVID-19 has huge implications on the economy as well. So we need to have a balanced approach, but we need also to be honest about the fact that we're having a balanced approach. And that, again, I think is key to that trust, which will hopefully be what brings us through this crisis. Much more to be said, of course, but some key points for me so far, Janos.
Thank you so much. This is very insightful, and I'd like to just pick up some of your messages. On the one hand, the impact on the vulnerable groups. And you mentioned the youth. Actually, the new generations has affected, probably one of the most, but also you mentioned the immigrants communities or other vulnerable communities. I think in that sense, it's very important to see exactly that we are talking about a global, this is really the crisis, the COVID-19, the pandemic has a global reach, but with very targeted local effects. And in that sense, of course, whether this is local businesses, whether this is citizens or groups, communities, how do you see, and you mentioned many of these concrete government tools like the transparency, the openness, the communication, in order to involving and develop, maintain, foster the trust. And in that sense, how you see the diversity of emerging needs, of the actors involved, and how you could deliver coherent response. And you started, how to balance the national imperatives with local requirements. So how you could provide a consistent response, but at the same time, tailoring to the needs of the various vulnerable groups.
That's a very good question. I think it's a question that governments around the world are grappling with every day. And I'm not sure that Norway has found the perfect answer to that question either. But you're right, the needs are diverse, and vulnerable groups, of course, are groups that we need to really make sure that we take care of. We try to provide the necessary support for our municipalities to be able to follow up the vulnerable groups in a targeted way. So it's both a question of course, financial support to our municipalities to be able to put in place the measures that are needed, but also advice and guidance on how to do it. And we've put, for instance, it has been the case that for lack of healthcare workers to work on tracing COVID-19, some of the people that should have been working with vulnerable kids are now working with COVID-19 tracing instead. So we've said that that's not an option. We need to make sure that all those kids get what they need through the crisis, and we need to recruit other people to do contact tracing, for instance. You don't have to be a medical professional to do contact tracing. You can have another background. So, but and also because this is a marathon, right? It's a marathon. We're going to be working on this for a long time, even with the prospect of a vaccine. We need to prepare that at least we need to be at the level that we are now in terms of readiness until next summer. And that means that municipalities have to adapt to that. The government services have to adapt to that. What we've also tried to do is we have a much closer contact with our directorates, which on different areas. And also across directorates. Now, this is something that we need to do more post-COVID-19 as well, I think, to coordinate government efforts much more closely than what we maybe have traditionally done. There are many reasons for the organization of governments. It's about placing responsibility firmly in one place. But the problem is that with COVID-19, but also with other challenges that we face as a society, it's not necessarily expedient to place the responsibility only one place, because as a matter of fact, it affects many other areas as well. So again, I'm back to sort of coordinating the work and spending, I think, putting our efforts into that is going to be crucial for the results that we want to see. I think this is a lesson learned also for after COVID-19, both in terms of better coordination, but also the innovation that this crisis has thrust upon us is something that we need to safeguard in the years to come. Because now we see that it's possible to do things differently when we are pressured to do it. And we need to keep sort of that spirit of innovation in the after the shock as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This is very insightful. And I like very much your reference to the marathon. And in your previous question, you also mentioned that it's also preparing for the next crisis. Actually, the next wave, the next crisis. This is changing our attitude. This is changing our mindset. And I like very much what you highlighted as a lesson, how to also benefit from a crisis. And it's true that in the previous sessions, there were several references how the traditional silos disappeared, how this coordination became much more natural because of the need, because of the situation, because of the extent of the crisis, the expectations. And in that sense, never lose a good crisis. This is the motto. So how in Norway and how you learn from local experimentation, you mentioned the innovations, how you could use this situation, what the national government can learn and move, recognizing the new innovations, the new working methods, building on new promising ideas. How actually, as a national government, you could also diffuse, you could facilitate the distribution in order to apply this in Norway.
Well, I have experience. I used to be Minister of Digitalization. And I'm also, in addition to being Minister of Local Government and Modernization now, I'm also responsible for the coordination of our efforts to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 in Norway. So I know everything about the challenges about breaking down the silos, because both digitalizing society, but also reaching the SDGs is something that really requires breaking down silos. And we've been talking about the need to break down silos for a long time, but I think this crisis has thrust upon us the need to do it very quickly and in new ways. So we've seen a lot of measures where the government has had aspirations for a long time, but where, because of COVID-19, things are happening much more swiftly. For instance, we've had this, we've tried to make people make use of online consultations with health services for a long time. And but before COVID-19, nobody really did it. After COVID-19, of course, it has exploded, quite literally, which is a good thing. And I think that is something which is going to continue also post COVID-19, because we are adapting to new ways of doing things. And we're seeing that if you can sit in your office and consult your doctor for 5 minutes about something which doesn't require a physical checkup, that's much more efficient both for you and for the health service. It's done in that way. Now, of course, if you need a physical checkup, you will get one, but you get my point. And we're also seeing that we've also been talking about digital or legal barriers to digitalization for a long time. And we have started sort of a work in my ministry to look through sort of all the laws on what do we need to change in order to have them technology neutral. And then COVID came along. We needed to do this very quickly, because suddenly we found out that there were laws where it's written into the law that you need to have a physical meeting. It's not just a meeting, it needs to be physical, that you need a physical signature, where a digital signature would be just fine. And one of the things that I worked with as Minister of Digitalization was that we need to have machine or AI-ready laws and regulations. And I think this is just the beginning of a bigger transformation, where we need to look at our legal framework to make sure that it doesn't stand in the way of innovation and digitalization in the years to come. But I think all change in a society really comes down to three things. It comes down to culture, leadership, and competence. So you need to have a culture for thinking outside of the box, challenging existing ways of doing things, allowing your co-workers to come up with new ideas, and allowing, to some extent, failure. Because, of course, as in the public sector, it's taxpayers' money that we spend, so failure is not accepted. But I think if we are to allow ourselves to think afresh about how to give services to our citizens, then we also need to allow for failure. Otherwise, we won't have that innovation. We also need leaders who, of course, inspire this culture of innovation, and we need competence to follow through. And we see that, for instance, in the municipalities in Norway, they are very different. Some are, of course, huge, but some are very, very small, and they don't necessarily have the necessary competence to follow through on innovations. So we need a very close cooperation, I think, between the municipal level and the national level to make sure that we together can make those advances and maybe together join forces to bring about new technology platforms and new things that are necessary in order to make use of these innovations. So I just, in June, I presented a new white paper to Parliament on innovation in the public sector. And the interesting thing about that is also that the municipal organizations are very much behind it and adapting it. But also we made last year a new strategy for digitalization of the public sector, which was made together with the municipal level. Because we see that it doesn't really matter if the government does a lot or the municipalities does a lot. We need to make sure that these services are seamless across governmental levels. Because the public don't care if a service is provided by the state or the municipality. What they care about is that they get their service when they need it, that it's a good quality service, and that it's less hassle getting it or receiving it. And in order to do that, we need to work together, basically.
I mean, thank you so much. And I do understand now if you work on the SDGs, this is very, very, and mainstreaming and mobilizing and leading for the 2030 agenda. I mean, this is really very challenging. So you know much more about this is the challenges related to coordination and engagement. So the COVID-19 crisis also accelerated many of the existing trends. And you refer to the transformation of the digital transformation. This is, for example, the health consultation. That's very interesting to see. And you also used, for example, the consultation process, like the health consultations, the hackathons. And this is very interesting when we see in the current situation to foster trust and sometimes rebuild trust. For example, to understand what measures, protective measures or health measures can work. Before I open the floor for this is really the conversation, and I'd like to, on the one hand, invite everyone to share your experiences, but also your questions with Minister Astrup. And I see now the results of the poll, and surprisingly, so the 4 responses, they were relatively even, but deploying the unified response and enabling other actors, including the local level, received 20%, and countering the negative economic impacts and supporting directly the citizens is 30%. So it seems that, you know, the impact, whether this is the economic impact or the direct support to citizens, this is more influential than, you know, the coordination or the unified response. Is it a surprising response to you, Minister?
No, not at all. I think it's a very natural response, and this crisis has a huge impact on people's lives. People are losing their jobs. People are being laid off across the board. So the fact that that what's foremost in people's minds is security for themselves and their families is completely natural and extremely important. My worry is that we're coming out of this crisis exacerbating the inequalities that are already existing in our societies, which again will be make it even more difficult to make sure that our societies thrive and that we can help individuals both in the short and in the long run. So in Norway, we have put in place many measures directed at helping citizens and businesses in particular, and I think it's important that the public sector services, of course, many of the public sector services in Norway, or most of the services that people need in Norway are provided by the public sector. So that they sort of work as normal or as normal as possible is also helping giving people or individuals security in their daily lives. But we need, of course, to make sure that we don't come out of this crisis with mass unemployment. So we are spending a lot of money now to help businesses get through COVID-19 in order to avoid that. Now, some businesses will undoubtedly not survive through the crisis, and new businesses will emerge as a result of the crisis as well, and in the aftermath. But we need to make sure that the impact on society is as little as possible when it comes to that point. So I find that completely natural. But in order to do that, in order to make sure that we have measures that really help those businesses that are in need, that we help those individuals that are in need, we need the coordination, we need the unified response, we need the trust, we need the transparency. So it really is not a question of either or. I think it's a question of looking at these things together and saying, okay, we need a holistic approach to the whole COVID-19 crisis, the private sector, the public sector, and the rest of society, and what we together can do to make sure that we come through this crisis as well as is possible. And so far, of course, we've seen in Norway the unemployment spiked after we closed down in the 12th of March. But through the summer things improved, and now of course we're into our second wave, and businesses are struggling and people are fearing for the future, and that's completely understandable, and we need to do what we can to reassure them that we will have their backs through this crisis. And that's also, I think, important to ensure that the social fabric, the trust which binds us all together is preserved through the crisis. We are a society in Norway with a very high level of trust. But trust you can't take for granted. I mean, trust is built in millimeters and it's torn down in kilometers. So it goes really quickly once you lose the grip on that trust. And one of the things that is necessary, I think, is to make sure that, as I said, inequalities are not growing through the crisis or after the crisis, but that we make sure that that essential element of our social fabric is preserved.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much. And I'd like to pick up 3 elements, and these are related to questions we received from the audience. One is the relationship with the SDG. And you explained that in the past over half a year, of course, the COVID-19 crisis had an impact. It had an impact on everything, but including also the SDGs. So how have you managed in Norway, how have you managed to maintain a focus on the SDGs?
I think it's important that the SDGs, this has to be the decade of action, right? We only have 10 years left to reach the SDGs. And I think we need, the SDGs need to be something that is not done on the side or in addition to what you normally do. It needs to be incorporated in all your efforts, both at the national and the subnational level. So we have given our municipalities a very clear message that the SDGs needs to be incorporated in all their planning activities. And we need to see also COVID-19 measures in the SDG, in the light of the SDGs as well. But needless to say, of course, responding to a crisis means that other things are placed a bit on the back burner. And but what are the crucial elements of the SDGs? Well, it's about making sure that inequalities are dealt with, that everybody gets a good education, and even through the crisis, the vulnerable kids needs to make sure that we need to make sure that they also have a good education, good health services, and that we still, with our crisis measures, make sure that it's sustainable businesses that are encouraged when we now give support to new businesses as a crisis measure. So but of course, it is difficult to make sure that the SDGs are something that is not that it's something that we integrate into everything we do in a natural way.
Very interesting, and highlighting the focus on inequalities, but also the shared responsibility across levels of government. It seems these are also contributing to building trust. And I'd like to ask the second question from the audience, which is related to what is your secret in Norway? Because if we see after the financial crisis, even in the Scandinavian countries, there was a quite significant decline in trust in government, but you stayed, and similarly in the past months. So what is your secret to maintain trust in government?
That's a very good question. And we have this democracy project that my department has launched, where we have measured trust in government institutions at both the national and subnational level for the last few years. And before the crisis, we saw that at the subnational level, trust was still very high. At the national level, there was a slightly lower trust than it used to be. I think that has changed through this crisis. Because so far, at least, all our polls show that people have high trust in how the government is handling the crisis. But more important than that, they have high trust in the institutions that are handling the crisis. And that's, of course, the most important thing, because politicians, they come and go, but the institutions, they remain. And that's the most important thing. I mean, we can't expect people to trust individual politicians, but we have to do what we can to make sure that people trust the institutions. And that has so far gone well. But I think the fact that we are a very open society, there is a very, politicians are very accessible. And we try our best as well to make the difference between politicians and people and the citizens as little as possible. And the fact that the Prime Minister is very available. She participates in these public question times on Facebook and so with other ministers as well. And this, I think, helps build trust, because we're not sort of sitting in our tower somewhere looking down on people. We are very much trying to make sure that we do the opposite.
And thank you so much. I can testify, about your accessibility, and I thank you so much. So just quickly, the third question, which is linking to the innovation, and what is and of course, the collaboration innovation between the municipal and the central government is also in your portfolio. But what was the impact of the crisis on this collaboration, on innovation between the national government and the municipals?
I think it has had a positive impact on the relationship between the local government and national government, in terms of that we need to cooperate to quickly come up with new solutions to problems that need to be solved rapidly because of the crisis. But I think most importantly is how we work long term, and the organization for the municipalities in Norway, they have started this work on radical innovation, which I think is very interesting. It's something that I have also talked a lot about, both as Minister of Digitalization, but also now we're in charge of innovation in the public sector, because we've been doing gradual improvements for decades, and it's worked well. We're one of the most digital societies in the world, especially in the public sector. But the opportunity is now to really leapfrog and solve our challenges in completely new ways, because we now have tools to do it that we didn't have before. That opportunity is huge, and it needs to be I think, harnessed, and we need to do it together. And we've identified several sort of life events that we are prioritizing to digitalize across the municipal and the national level. And one of them is having a child, for instance. And many people think that there's only 2 people involved in making a child, but actually we identified over 60. So we need to work together also across. We need to work together not only between the municipal level and the state and the national level, but also with other relevant actors. So including them in a holistic approach to these life events. I can't hear you, Janos.
I just thank you so much. And if you have any final remark, or if you would like to just highlight that what you're personally committed to do differently in light of, this is the lessons learned from the crisis. I thank you so much, Minister. And if you have again any final remark, or if you could mention this personal commitment, what you would like to do differently.
Well, I think we're just at the beginning of learning lessons from COVID-19. I think it's important that we, in the months and years to come, really try to understand what this crisis has meant for our societies, and how what we need to change in the years to come to make sure that we are better prepared as a society, but also that we can make use of the innovations and the new ways of working together to solve the big challenges of our time. And there are many of them. And the SDGs are among them. We have a climate challenge, which is huge, needs to be solved. We have a problem of growing inequalities in the world. None of these challenges will be solved by people not talking to each other, or not cooperating, or doing their own thing. We need to come together, pull together, and build trust, and make sure that our citizens also see what we're trying to do, and that we are together trying to achieve something. And maybe this crisis has brought that feeling of that we're all in the same boat a bit. It's becoming a bit more prominent and visible that we are all in the same boat. And maybe that's what we need in order to solve other challenges as well, once we come out of this crisis, which I really do hope is soon, because I think we're all getting a bit tired of some of the new ways of working. For instance, not meeting one another, which I think most people lack, and I'm among them. But thank you so much for having me today, Janos, and I wish you all the best for both this conference and the future.
Thank you so much, Minister Astrup. And yeah, you're right. We are indeed in the same global boat, and we are sharing our responsibilities, but also our action. And thank you so much for sharing your insights, shaping this global dialogue, this global reflection. Your insights, they are very influential. And I also thank the audience for joining and asking your question in this debate. This session will be posted on the Government Aftershock site event, and I look forward to continuing this dialogue. Thank you so much again, Minister.
Thank you.